Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a deep look at how Kyiv's careful strategy has worked to dismantle Russia's long-held supply dominance. This shift didn't happen overnight. It's the result of calculated moves, precise targeting, strategic timing, and a clear understanding that wars are not only fought on the front lines, but also behind them, deep within the systems that keep armies functioning. This script will walk through how Ukraine reached a position where it could challenge Russia's long-standing logistical and resource monopoly, what that means for the conflict, and how it may shape future events. To understand why this is significant, we need to look back at the early assumptions many analysts and observers held. Russia entered the war with the expectation that its overwhelming logistical depth, its energy infrastructure, and its historical control over major transit corridors would ensure it had the upper hand. Russia believed that its military machine, backed by decades of industrial buildup and extensive supply lines, could simply outlast Ukraine. But Ukraine did not approach the war from the same angle. Instead of trying to match Russia's vast supply network, Ukraine focused on identifying weak points and vulnerabilities within it. Ukraine realized early that Russia's supply advantage came with structural weaknesses. Large depots, rail hubs, fuel storage sites, pipeline nodes, and military transport routes are powerful assets, but they are also fixed, predictable, and slow to adapt when under pressure. With the introduction of precision drones, long-range missile systems, and improved intelligence provided through partnerships, Ukraine gained the tools to threaten those once secure points. The first major shift happened when Ukraine began using high-precision capabilities to disrupt Russian fuel distribution. Russia's military operations depend heavily on fuel movement, especially for armored vehicles, aircraft, and transport fleets. When Ukraine showed it could strike oil refineries and fuel depots deep inside Russian-held territory, it signaled a change in the direction of the war. Suddenly, Russia had to divert resources to protect facilities that had never before required such high levels of defense. As Ukraine's drone program expanded, the distance and accuracy of these strikes improved. Ukraine demonstrated that it could send drones several hundred kilometers into Russian territory, hitting refineries, warehouses, and transit choke points. This not only created material damage, but forced Russia to stretch its air defense systems much thinner than intended. Protecting every refinery, every depot, every railroad junction became impossible. These strikes had a ripple effect. When fuel runs short, formations slow down. When depots are hit, supply schedules break. When refineries reduce output, civilian markets feel the pressure. Ukraine's precision strikes were not random acts. They were deliberate attempts to widen the strain on Russia's ability to sustain prolonged operations. In addition to attacking fuel infrastructure, Ukraine applied pressure to Russia's dependency on large rail systems. Russian logistics heavily rely on trains to move ammunition, equipment, and personnel across vast distances. By targeting rail junctions, bridges, and storage points, Ukraine forced Russia to reroute cargo, often adding days or weeks of delay. A modern military cannot function effectively with constant uncertainty in delivery schedules. Delayed ammunition means delayed offensives. Delayed fuel means halted convoys. Ukraine transformed this into a strategic advantage. Another key piece of Kyiv's strategy came from analyzing how Russia centralized much of its supply structure. Centralization is efficient during peacetime, but during war it becomes a vulnerability. A single depot can store thousands of tons of ammunition. A single refinery can supply an entire region's military vehicles. A single pipeline can feed multiple bases. When Ukraine began hitting these nodes, the losses were not limited to the facility, but to entire distribution chains dependent on them. Ukraine's decision to focus on these points required patience and precision. Each strike had to be calculated for maximum effect, avoiding unnecessary waste of resources. This is where Ukraine's use of intelligence became crucial. With assistance from allies and its own improved reconnaissance, Ukraine gained near real-time awareness of supply movement patterns. This allowed it to strike at optimal moments, such as when fuel convoys were loading, when trains were stationed, or when depots reached peak storage. As these patterns became clear, Russia had to shift its logistics farther from the front lines. This created new complications. Supplies that once traveled 50 kilometers now had to travel 200 or more. Longer distances mean slower deliveries, increased exposure to ambushes, and greater wear on vehicles. Ukraine capitalized on this by targeting roads, bridges, and choke points that became necessary after the relocation of Russian supply bases. Another aspect of this strategy involved Ukraine's internal improvements. While attacking Russian supply lines, Ukraine was simultaneously working to strengthen its own. Ukraine expanded domestic production of drones, artillery shells, and armored equipment. This helped reduce dependence on unpredictable external deliveries. With a more reliable internal supply system, Ukraine gained greater flexibility and freedom of action. It could dedicate more energy to disrupting Russia's logistics without compromising its own battlefield needs. Ukraine's disruption of Russia's energy transit monopoly also played a major role. Historically, Russia used energy pipelines through Ukraine and Europe as political leverage. With the conflict pushing Europe to diversify its energy imports, Russia's ability to use energy as a strategic weapon diminished. This economic pressure reduced the financial resources available to support Russian military operations. Ukraine amplified this shift by refusing to renew certain transit agreements, cutting off key routes that Russia depended on. The combined effect weakened Russia's overall strategic position. As Ukraine intensified its precision strikes, Russia attempted to adapt by decentralizing storage facilities, using smaller depots spread across larger territories. While this increased survivability, it also reduced efficiency. More trucks were required, more fuel was consumed. More personnel were needed to manage scattered sites. Every adaptation came with a cost, and Ukraine's strategy was designed to raise those costs continuously. The psychological impact of these supply disruptions was also profound. Russian soldiers on the front line began experiencing shortages of ammunition, rations, and medical supplies. Reports of fuel scarcity and delays circulated publicly. When troops sense their supply lines are vulnerable, confidence drops. When commanders cannot rely on predictable supply schedules, planning becomes hesitant. War is not only fought with weapons, but with morale, consistency, and trust in the system supporting you. Ukraine used this to bolster its narrative, showing the world that Russia's logistics could be broken, helped maintain Western support. Allies were more willing to send advanced weapons when Ukraine demonstrated it could use them effectively. Every successful strike reinforced the belief that Ukraine was capable of shaping the course of the war. Meanwhile, Russia's attempts to strengthen its industrial output faced major obstacles. Sanctions restricted access to materials and technology. Workforce shortages grew as more personnel were mobilized. Aging infrastructure struggled to keep up with wartime demands. The pressure created by Ukrainian strikes magnified these internal problems. It exposed the reality that Russia's supply monopoly was not as resilient as once believed. One essential element of Ukraine's strategy is its emphasis on cumulative damage. A single refinery strike may not halt an army, but dozens over several months force systemic breakdown. A single hit on a railway line can be repaired in days, but repeated strikes across multiple routes slow the entire network. Ukraine's persistence created long-term degradation rather than short bursts of disruption. The goal was not quick collapse but gradual erosion. Ukraine also used deception and timing to strengthen its strategy. By striking at different times and locations, Ukraine forced Russia to spread its air defenses thin. Russia could not predict where the next drone might come from or which facility might be targeted. This unpredictability is as powerful as the strike itself. When a defender cannot anticipate the attacker, it becomes increasingly difficult to protect critical assets. Furthermore, Ukraine used smaller, low-cost drones to exhaust Russian air defense systems before deploying more sophisticated weapons. This created an environment where Russia spent more resources defending supplies than moving them. Time and again, Ukraine demonstrated that the key to breaking a supply monopoly is not just firepower but creativity. Another part of Kyiv's calculated approach involved targeting key bottlenecks rather than attempting to destroy everything at once. Military supply systems rely on a few essential points to function smoothly. If those are removed, entire chains collapse temporarily. Ukraine identified these spots carefully and struck at moments when the disruption would be most significant. A temporarily disabled rail hub during a major offensive can shift the entire momentum of a battlefield. Ukraine used this tactic repeatedly, leveraging timing to its advantage. The long-term consequence of all this is that Russia no longer holds unquestioned control over its own supply lines. Its logistical system is now contested, vulnerable, and expensive to maintain. Ukraine's precision has disproven the belief that Russia's logistical depth made it untouchable. Instead, Ukraine has shown that even the largest systems can be dismantled with the right strategy. This shift also changes how future conflicts might be fought. The Ukraine-Russia war has demonstrated that the era of massive, centralized supply systems is weakening. Modern precision weapons make it too risky to rely on large depots or huge infrastructure hubs. Mobility, decentralization, and resilience are becoming more important than sheer size. Ukraine's approach may serve as a model for smaller nations facing larger adversaries in the future. At the same time, this strategy has forced Russia into a defensive stance in areas where it once held absolute confidence. Instead of focusing entirely on offensive operations, Russia now must allocate significant portions of its resources to protect supply lines deep within its territory. This shift divides attention and stretches capabilities. It undermines Russia's ability to maintain sustained offensives and forces it into a reactive position, responding to Ukrainian actions rather than dictating the pace of the war. Ukraine's calculated precision has also had a diplomatic impact. Allies view Ukraine as a capable and strategic partner. The more Ukraine demonstrates competence in undermining Russia's supply system, the stronger its argument for continued support becomes. This affects funding, weapons deliveries, and international backing. By choosing to contest Russia's supply monopoly, Ukraine has also shaped the economic environment. With Russia facing internal fuel shortages and disrupted transit networks, its export revenue decreases. Every economic loss limits Russia's ability to finance extended operations, invest in production, or maintain large troop mobilizations. Ukraine's strikes may not halt Russia's war machine entirely, but they reduce its strength over time. It's also important to consider the internal strain this places on Russian civilians. Fuel shortages, rising prices, and damaged infrastructure create dissatisfaction. Public discontent does not directly end wars, but it increases pressure on leadership and complicates long-term planning. Ukraine's strategy leverages this indirect pressure to create an additional layer of strain on the Russian state. Looking ahead, Ukraine's ability to maintain this level of pressure depends on continued access to advanced systems, sustained intelligence sharing, and ongoing domestic production. Ukraine has shown that even with limited resources, precision and strategy can compensate for numerical disadvantages. As long as Ukraine continues improving its capabilities, it can keep Russia's supply monopoly fractured. At the same time, Russia will continue trying to adapt. It may attempt to fortify key infrastructure, diversify supply routes, or invest in emergency production facilities. However, each adaptation introduces delays and inefficiencies, which Ukraine can continue to exploit. The strategic landscape favors the side that can adapt faster, and Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated agility in this regard. Ultimately, Kyiv's calculated precision has reshaped the dynamics of the war. Russia's once dominant supply system is now exposed, vulnerable, and continuously under pressure. Ukraine transformed its disadvantage into a strength by focusing not on overwhelming force, but on undermining the backbone of Russia's operations. This approach has empowered Ukraine to remain resilient, to keep fighting effectively, and to challenge one of the world's largest military powers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, remember to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments.